I was never the type of guy who stood out in high school. I wasn't the athlete. I wasn't the class clown. I wasn't even the straight A student. I was just there, somewhere in the middle of everything and everyone, invisible most of the time, except when someone needed an answer during a pop quiz or when the teacher asked for help moving chairs. That was me, the helper, the background character. Until she walked into my life and made me feel like I existed. Her name was Elena. She transferred to our school in the middle of the year, the kind of thing that always made people curious. New students were rare in our small town. She was quiet at first, but not shy. There was something calm and magnetic about her. Her laugh wasn't loud, but it stayed in your ears after she left. And her eyes, they had this quiet kind of intensity, like she was constantly reading the world around her, including people who thought no one noticed them. People like me. It started with one shared lab station in chemistry, just two random last names putting us side by side. She asked if she could borrow my pencil. I remember the exact way she smiled when I handed it to her. Grateful, but with a tiny bit of mischief, as if she already knew it wasn't just a pencil I was handing. Over. From that day on, we started talking. Nothing big at first. Homework, music, weekend plans, but something in her voice made me want to say more than I usually did. She made silence feel okay. She didn't need me to perform, to impress, to change. She just listened. And slowly, I started letting pieces of myself come out. My awkward humor, my love for old comic books, my obsession with movie soundtracks. And somehow, she didn't laugh. She leaned in closer. By the time spring came around, everyone was starting to notice how close we were. We'd sit together at lunch, sometimes talking, sometimes just listening to each other's music. It felt safe, natural, unforced, but in high school, nothing stays untouched for long. People began to talk, and not always kindly. "Dude, how'd you end up with her?" someone had said to me in the hallway one day, like she was a prize. I'd stolen. "Betty's just her charity case," another laughed behind my back. I tried to ignore it. I had learned how to tune people out. But what I didn't know back then was that some of those voices weren't strangers. Some of them came from people I thought were my friends. Jealousy is a quiet monster. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just whispers and waits. One of those whispers came from Tyler. He was the kind of guy who was always half joking but never really kind. He had tried flirting with Elena the week she arrived, overly confident, too loud, like he thought the world owed him attention. But Elena had smiled politely and turned away. From that day, he barely hid his dislike for me. At first, I thought it was harmless, just guy stuff. But then small things started happening. Jokes that felt sharper, friends of friends starting to look at me strangely. Elena getting weird texts at night and asking me if I'd meant what I said earlier. And me, confused because I hadn't said anything unusual. I didn't know it yet, but someone was setting me up. Back then, all I saw was the brightness of first love, the way her hand brushed mine during group projects, the way she waited for me after class, even when her friends told her to leave, the way we once walked home in the rain, laughing like we were the only two people on Earth. It was real. And because it was real, it scared people. People like Tyler. People who couldn't understand how a nobody like me had become someone, in her eyes. So they decided to remind me of my place. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that for the first time in my life, someone saw me, and I loved her for it. There's a certain kind of silence that grows when people envy you. It's not always loud. It doesn't always announce itself with cruel jokes or dramatic betrayals. Sometimes it shows up as a slight delay in a laugh, a fake smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes, or a compliment that stings more than it flatters. And I began to notice all of that the closer I got to Elena. Tyler was the first to shift. He and I weren't best friends, but we had grown up together, played video games after school, sat next to each other in assemblies, shared the kind of shallow but familiar friendship that comes from being stuck in the same place for too long. He always had this way of teasing people, especially those he thought were weaker than him, and he never liked to be upstaged. So when Elena started choosing me, walking with me, sitting beside me, laughing at my dumb jokes instead of his polished ones, it was like something snapped inside him. But instead of confronting me, he started planting seeds. Quiet ones, strategic, poisonous. "Hey man," he'd say, slinging an arm around me in the cafeteria. "Saw you and Elena at lunch again. She's cute. Kind of out of your league though, huh?" He'd laugh like it was a joke, like he was just messing around. But the words sank in. The people around us laughed too, but not the same way. Their laughter had edges. Other friends started joining in. Jason, who I once trusted with my childhood secrets, started making harmless comments during group hangouts. Bet Elena likes you for your math homework, dude. You think she'd still hang out if you stopped giving her the answers? It started getting harder to breathe around them, like I had to defend something invisible. One day, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I was coming out of the boys' locker room and paused in the hallway when I heard Tyler and Jason talking in low voices near the vending machines. "I swear, man," Jason said. "It's like he thinks she's actually into him." Tyler scoffed. "Please, give it another week. I've got a plan." They both laughed. I stood frozen, my gym bag slipping down my shoulder. My throat went dry. I wanted to walk up and ask what the hell they were talking about, but something in me, that old familiar fear of being the punchline, made me stay silent. And still, I didn't tell Elena about it. I didn't want to seem paranoid. I didn't want to be that guy, the insecure one. She had opened her heart to me and trusted me with her presence, her time. I wanted to be strong for her. So I buried it, hoping it was just dumb talk. But soon, little things began to change. Elena seemed confused when I brought up something she supposedly said. "Wait, I never texted that," she told me once when I asked her about a late night message that didn't sound like her. "Are you sure it was me?" I was. The number was hers. The name. Her name. But the tone, cold, dismissive, felt wrong. Another time, I sent her a photo of the book we both wanted to read, and her reply was strangely flat. "Why are you acting like we're a couple?" Chill. It hurt. Deep. Because until then, we had been slowly growing into something unspoken but beautiful. And now, it felt like someone had changed the channel on us without warning. But I didn't accuse. I gave space. I waited. And then, one day, I saw it. Jason had left his phone on the cafeteria table when he went to grab a tray. I wasn't snooping, I swear I wasn't. But the screen lit up with a message from a group chat called Operation Wake Up Call, and my name was in the latest message. I froze. My hand reached out before my brain could stop me. Just one glance. Just one peek. And there it was. A string of messages sent from a fake account, created to look like mine. Conversations that never happened. Screenshots doctored to make me look like a creep. A plan, step by step, on how to make Elena think. I was clingy, obsessed, even manipulative. I felt sick. The people I had trusted, the ones who laughed with me during recess, who ate chips in my living room. They had spent weeks, maybe months, twisting something pure into something vile, all because they couldn't stand to see someone like me happy with someone like her. When Jason came back to the table, I was already gone. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling of my bedroom with a weight in my chest I couldn't name. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. It was knowing that for weeks, I had defended them in my head, made excuses, tried to believe the best. And now, the truth stared back at me like an ugly wound. I wasn't just a target. I was a threat. And they were willing to burn me down just to stop me from rising. But I wasn't going to let them. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't some loud confrontation or a dramatic tear-streaked goodbye in the school hallway like in the movies. No. Real heartbreak, I learned, unfolds in quiet, invisible ways, through pauses that stretch too long, smiles that fade too fast, and messages that don't get answered anymore. The Monday after I found the fake messages, I walked into school with a pit in my stomach. I'd barely slept, my thoughts spinning with betrayal and disbelief. My instincts told me to go straight to Elena, to explain everything, to show her the truth before it was too late. But fear, that old quiet monster that had followed me for years, made me hesitate. What if she didn't believe me? What if the damage had already been done? I spotted her by her locker before first period. She was talking to Maya, her best friend, and as usual, her presence lit up the hallway. But when her eyes caught mine, something flickered. Something unfamiliar. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. And then, it was gone. She turned back to Maya without a word. I froze mid-step. I told myself maybe she hadn't seen me. Maybe she was distracted. But deep down I knew. Something had changed. That day, I waited for her in the library like we always did during study hall. She didn't show up. At lunch, I sat at our usual table. The chair across from me remained empty. I messaged her that night. "Hey, everything okay?" No reply. The next day I tried again. Did I do something wrong? Nothing. By the end of the week, the silence had grown so loud I could barely think. My stomach twisted every time I walked into a room she used to be in. My chest ached at the sound of her laugh from across the hallway. A laugh that wasn't mine to share anymore. And then came the final blow. Maya cornered me near the art wing one afternoon, arms crossed, mouth twisted in disgust. "She knows, you know," she snapped. "Knows what?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "About what you sent her. About the stuff you said behind her back. The way you pretended to be someone you're not." My blood ran cold. I tried, but she cut me off. "Don't even try to deny it. She saw the messages. We all did. Elena trusted you, and now she doesn't even want to hear your name." And just like that, she turned and walked away. I leaned against the cold hallway wall, trying not to slide down to the floor. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Elena and shake the truth into her. But instead, I just stood there, heart pounding, eyes stinging, helpless. The people I'd once called my friends had not only sabotaged me, they'd succeeded. They'd rewritten the story of who I was in Elena's eyes, and I wasn't even given the chance to defend myself. And the worst part? I understood why she believed it. Because she had trusted me. And when someone you trust suddenly becomes the villain in a story you didn't know was being written, it's easier to retreat than to question everything. So she disappeared from my life. Not in distance, but in presence. She was still at school, still in classes, still walking those same halls, but she wasn't with me anymore. And I felt that absence like a shadow, following me into every room, wrapping itself around every breath. Weeks passed, and with every day, the silence grew heavier. I could have tried harder. I could have marched up to her and demanded to explain, but something inside me, a mix of shame and exhaustion, held me back. Maybe it was the realization that even if I cleared my name, the trust was already broken. Maybe I didn't want to see her look at me the way everyone else did, with suspicion, with disappointment, with that silent, "You're not who I thought you were." I stopped going to the library. I stopped staying late after school. I even started skipping lunch just to avoid the hollow stares and whispered rumors. And through it all, one question haunted me. How do you prove you're not a liar when the lie has already been believed? I didn't have an answer. All I had was the echo of her voice, the memory of her hand brushing mine during late study nights, and the searing ache of watching something beautiful shatter into something I couldn't fix. They had taken her from me, not with force but with whispers, and now I was alone. But if there was one thing they'd forgotten, it's that even in silence I was still listening, and I was ready to rebuild, not just what I had with Elena, but who I was without their lies. Time didn't heal it. Not at first. It just dulled the edge of the pain and replaced it with something colder, something quieter, like the steady hum of a storm just beyond the horizon. I carried the silence Elena left behind like a scar I didn't want to show anyone. I stopped talking in class, stopped staying after school, stopped caring about most things I used to love. But even then, I never stopped thinking about what happened. I needed to understand. I needed to know who had done this and why. I started looking at everything differently. The people I once trusted, the ones I'd laughed with during group projects and shared lunches with in the cafeteria, I began studying their faces, their whispers, their sudden silences when I passed by. It was like being a ghost haunting a life I no longer belonged to. No one looked me in the eye anymore. Not even the ones who used to call me a friend. But I paid attention. It was in Mr. Evans's computer lab that everything changed. He always left his office unlocked, a bad habit probably. But on that particular afternoon, I was returning a charger I had borrowed. That's all. I wasn't snooping. Not yet. But something on his desk caught my eye. A stack of printed screenshots. They were blurred, but familiar. It was my name on them. And Elena's. I froze. Part of me wanted to back away. But another part, the part of me that had been silent for too long, reached forward and pulled the pages into focus. The fake messages. The same ones everyone had seen. The ones that destroyed me. But this time, I noticed something I hadn't before. A faint tag at the bottom of the screenshots. A cloud storage folder name. One I recognized immediately. It belonged to James. James had been one of my closest friends. We'd grown up on the same street, played the same games, shared the same dreams about leaving this town behind one day. He was quiet, never the center of attention, never cruel. Or so I thought. I felt the heat rise behind my eyes. My hands were shaking. Why would he do this? The next few days became a blur of silent questions. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I watched. I remembered things I had forgotten. The way James would freeze up whenever Elena and I got too close. The way he always volunteered to send the invites or share the project files whenever our group worked on something together. And suddenly, it all clicked. He had liked her. Maybe for longer than I had. And when she chose me, even in the smallest way, that was enough. Some people don't need a reason to ruin you. Just an opportunity. I didn't know what to do with that truth. Part of me wanted to explode, to call him out in front of everyone, to print the folder screenshots and post them in the hallway. But another part of me, the part that had been broken by this entire thing, just wanted peace. Still, I couldn't let it go, so I confronted him. It was after school, behind the gym where no one could overhear us. I stood there holding the paper with the folder name highlighted in yellow. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just said, "Why?" He stared at me for a long time. Then, without denying it, without even pretending, he simply said, "Because you always got what you didn't deserve." It hit harder than if he'd punched me. There it was. The truth. Ugly, sharp, and without remorse. I walked away without another word. But something inside me had changed. The pain wasn't gone. But now, I had a reason. A face. A name. And for the first time in months, I wasn't drifting anymore. I had a direction. They took everything from me with a lie. And I was going to take everything back. With the truth. Even if it took years. Even if no one believed me at first. Because now, I knew what they didn't. Revenge doesn't always come in fury. Sometimes it comes in silence. In patience. In watching. Your life blooms so bright that the people who buried you have to squint just to look. After that day behind the gym, something in me broke, but not the way they had hoped. It wasn't the kind of break that makes someone disappear quietly, fading into the backdrop of high school hallways and small-town rumors. No, it was the kind of break that sets fire to everything you once accepted and forces you to rebuild, brick by brick, on your own terms. Everyone still looked at me the same, like I was the joke, the guy who tried too hard, the desperate loser who forged messages for attention. No one cared that the story didn't make sense. No one asked why. Someone like me would ruin the only real connection I'd ever had. The truth didn't matter. In high school, perception was gospel, and mine was already written in permanent ink. But while they whispered, I worked. I stopped caring what they said and started using every free second I had to focus on myself. I buried my shame in textbooks, stayed late in the library and found comfort in things I could control, my grades, my goals, and the plan I would use to leave that school behind. I joined clubs I'd always been too afraid to try, entered writing contests no one else paid attention to, and even began coding after school with one of the teachers who saw more in me than most of my so-called friends ever did. The insults didn't stop, but they started sounding distant. Something happens when you stop trying to be liked. People get confused. They wait for you to break, to beg, to fit back into the role they wrote for you. And when you don't, you become something else. Something they can't define or predict. That's what I became. And quietly, without anyone noticing, I started to win. I won a regional short story competition, then another, then a scholarship, full ride. But I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post it. I didn't brag. I wanted it to build unnoticed, beneath the surface. Because when the time came, I wanted the reveal to be so loud, so impossible. To ignore that even the ones who never looked me in the eyes would have no choice but to see me. It wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about rewriting the version of me they tried to publish without my permission. The more I achieved, the more alone I became. But not in the sad, pitiful way they expected. This solitude was different. It was empowering. I wasn't lonely. I was focused. Every cruel word they had thrown at me became fuel. Every hallway whisper was another step on the ladder I was quietly climbing. Sometimes I'd still see Elena in the distance. She barely looked at me now. I couldn't blame her. She didn't know the truth. But I held on to the hope that one day, when all of this was behind us, she would. And that day would come sooner than any of them thought. Because the world outside our school was bigger than their lies, and I was already halfway through the door they thought they buried me, but I was just learning how to grow underground. It started with a flyer. Faded, wrinkled, taped to the corner of a bulletin board that no one really paid attention to, except me. I saw it one morning while waiting outside the library. National Student Creators Contest, it said in bold letters. Open to writers, designers, and photographers from across the country. I stared at it for a full minute. My fingers hovered near the edges of the paper, but I didn't take it down. I just memorized every word. I didn't tell anyone I was entering. Not my parents, who still believed my dreams were distractions. Not the teachers, who offered polite, filtered praise but clearly thought I'd peaked in mediocrity. And definitely not my classmates, who had already written me off as the guy who got ghosted by the girl he never deserved. The contest asked for one project, a personal work that reflected who I was. I spent weeks crafting mine, a photo essay paired with short written reflections. Each photo told a story from my time in school, but from my point of view. Not the filtered laugh track version everyone else remembered. The hallway where I was tripped and laughed at. The classroom desk with gum stuck underneath left there as a joke, just for me. The library table where I ate lunch alone, pretending to study so no one would notice. And then, a photo of the gym doors, closed, heavy, symbolic. A place of exclusion and transformation. I didn't caption the images with pity. I used words that cut through the narrative and reframed it. Pain became growth. Shame became defiance. Silence became art. I submitted everything just before the deadline. Then I forgot about it, or at least I tried to. The day the email came, I thought it was spam. I nearly deleted it, but something about the subject line made me open it instead. Congratulations! You've been selected as a finalist. My hands trembled on the trackpad. I read it again, and again. I had made it. Out of thousands of applicants, I had made it. I was invited to a ceremony in another state, all expenses paid. A weekend trip to showcase my project in front of industry professionals, magazine editors, artists, and other young creators. The same magazines that had once felt like fantasy, glossy pages filled with lives so different from mine, were now requesting me. But I still told no one. I showed up to school like nothing had changed. Sat in class like I hadn't just gotten a chance most of them would never even dream of. I carried that secret like armor. It protected me from the noise, the whispers, the sideways glances. It reminded me that I wasn't who they said I was. Not anymore. At the ceremony, I wore a secondhand suit I tailored myself. It didn't look like much, but it fit me perfectly. And more importantly, it fit who I had become. When I walked into the gallery space where our projects were being displayed, I saw my name printed on a white card. Just one word underneath it. Resilience. People stopped in front of my wall. They read the words. They looked longer than I expected. Some asked questions. Some just nodded. One woman with silver hair and a press badge asked if she could feature my work. I nodded silently, afraid my voice might betray the storm rising in my chest. In that moment, I didn't think about the hallway laughs or the lunchroom taunts. I thought about the closed gym doors and how I had just stepped through something far greater. When I flew home, I knew the silence wouldn't last much longer, because soon my story would appear on a national platform, and it would begin with the words they once used to break me. But this time, I'd be the one writing the ending. I didn't know the exact date it would go live. The editor had told me it would be soon, but those words float in limbo until they suddenly crash into your reality. It was a Monday. Cold. Gray. The kind of day where everything feels heavier than it should. I was halfway through my third period class, ignoring a group project I'd been pushed to the edge of, when my phone buzzed 3 times in a row. I usually didn't check my phone in class, not because of the rules, but because no one ever texted me anymore. But something about the triple buzz made my hand move before I could think. 3 messages. One from the editor. It's up. You're live. The second, from a number I didn't recognize. Is this really you? And the third from someone I hadn't heard from since freshman year. You wrote this? My chest tightened. I opened the link. There it was. My name, my photo. The title bold, centered, and clear. Resilience, a story of silence, survival, and becoming seen. The layout was perfect, each image carefully placed, each caption preserved. But what hit the hardest was the feature blurb that sat at the top of the article. A high school student turns years of rejection and isolation into one of the most powerful stories of the year. It wasn't just a post on some obscure blog. It was front-page material on one of the most respected student-focused publications in the country. They had millions of readers, teachers, students, education boards, even media outlets. My work was everywhere, and in the hours that followed, so was I. People started whispering in the halls. Not the usual murmurs of cruelty, but surprise, curiosity, regret. My classmates read it. Teachers printed it and tacked it onto bulletin boards. I even saw it taped. To the guidance counselor's door, my face, once ignored, now unavoidable. In the cafeteria, I heard my name. In the stairwell, I felt the stares shift, not of mockery, but of unfamiliar recognition. Even those who had once laughed loudest suddenly had nothing to say, and then something I never expected. Elena, Key, approached me after class, slowly, as if unsure whether she had the right. She looked nervous. I was too. Her voice was soft when she spoke. I read it, she said. That was all. But in those 3 words, I heard everything else. I know now. I'm sorry. You mattered more than they told me. I nodded. Thanks, I said. Simple, controlled, but inside, my heart was thundering like a drumline. That day, the principal called me into the office. I thought it might be disciplinary, some backlash for the truth I had dared to publish. Instead, she shook my hand, told me the school board had seen the article and wanted to include it in their newsletter. Then, she added something I'd never heard from any adult in that building before. We're proud of you. I left the office in a daze. This place, once so small and cruel and suffocating, suddenly felt different. Not warmer exactly, but weaker. Like the walls they'd used to box me in were finally crumbling. I had told my story, and this time, they couldn't twist it. They could only read it. Her name was Elena, and before everything went silent between us, her laughter used to be the loudest sound in my day. It wasn't that we were dating back then. High school had its way of turning real feelings into rumors before you even understood them, but there was something honest between us. A quiet friendship, late-night text exchanges, shared jokes during lunch. Until it stopped. Abruptly. It was during sophomore year, just weeks after I'd finally built up the nerve to ask if she wanted to go see a student film screening with me. She said yes. But the very next day, everything changed. Her replies slowed, then stopped. She avoided eye contact. One afternoon, I passed her and her friends near the lockers, and they fell silent. She didn't even look at me. That's when I knew something had been said. Something I hadn't done, but couldn't defend against. I learned later, through whispers and overheard cruelty, that someone had shown her messages, supposedly from me, mocking her behind her back. Crude, dishonest, forged. I never found out who faked them. Maybe it was someone jealous, someone bored, or maybe just someone cruel enough to ruin what they didn't understand. Either way, the damage was done, and she believed it. Now, 2 years later, she stood in front of me in the hallway, holding her phone like a lifeline, my article still open on the screen. "Can we talk?" she asked. Her voice didn't carry the same certainty it used to. It was careful, measured, but her eyes, they held something I hadn't seen in them in years. Regret, and maybe beneath that, hope. We went to a quiet bench near the back of the library, a place we used to sit together before everything unraveled. She asked how I'd written it, why I hadn't said something earlier. I told her the truth, that back then I didn't think anyone would listen, that after being branded a liar, speaking up felt like shouting into a locked room. She looked down at her hands and whispered, "I wanted to believe you. I just didn't know how." I nodded. "I didn't blame you," I said, even though part of me had for a long time. But I had also grown since then. I had written my pain, shaped it, shared it, and in doing so, made peace with pieces of it. Not all, but enough. She told me she hadn't stopped thinking about it. About me. About how easily she'd let go of something real because of something fake. "I should have come to you," she said. "I'm sorry." It was the first time she'd said that out loud. It mattered more than I expected. We talked for a long time. Longer than I thought we would. Not just about what had happened, but about everything in between. Her own struggles, the pressure to fit in, the fear of being cast out by association. She told me the same people who faked those messages later turned on her too. That popularity had a price no one warned her about. I realized then that she wasn't just the girl I used to know. She had changed too. Scarred, yes, but softer, realer, like me. When we left the library that day, something between us had shifted. Not a return to the past, but a slow, quiet unfolding towards something new. And for the first time in a long time, I walked down the hall without feeling like I needed to hide. Because someone who once believed a lie now wanted to hear my truth. What began in the quiet shadows of the library, just 2 chairs, an open phone screen, and the tangled weight of what had once been, soon spilled into days that felt unfamiliar in the best way. Elena and I started speaking again. At first it was light, cautious, a few messages here and there about classes, about the article, about how strange it all felt. But slowly, it began to resemble something more than friendship rebuilt. It felt like something blooming from the cracks. We didn't jump back into where we left off. Too much had happened. Too much had been left unsaid. But every shared silence now felt like space earned, not distance imposed. We began walking home together after school, taking the long route past the park just to stretch the moments. She asked questions, real ones, about how I had felt, about the moments I thought about quitting everything, about why I kept writing. I answered honestly, not for validation, but because for once someone wasn't trying to fix or explain my pain. She was simply listening, and then she told me her side, how lonely it had felt being on the inside of the group everyone else envied. How she had always felt like she was pretending to be someone brighter, louder, safer than she really was. How the day after our plans fell apart, she cried in her room with the messages in her hands, rereading them over and over, trying to convince herself they weren't real, but eventually letting the whispers win. That part broke something in me, not because I wanted her to hurt, but because it made everything that happened between us feel even more stolen, like both of us had been robbed of something before we even knew how valuable it was. But healing has strange timing. It doesn't always show up in a grand moment. Sometimes it's two people laughing again for the first time over something completely dumb. Sometimes it's standing in line at the school cafe, both reaching for the same coffee, both pulling back, and then realizing that neither of us is in a hurry anymore, that we can just stay in the moment. Weeks passed and people noticed. At first they whispered like they always did, but this time, neither of us flinched. I didn't care if they stared. She didn't care if they talked. It wasn't a secret, and it wasn't a statement. It was just us, finally free of the lies that had chained us to the past. Then came the spring showcase, a school event where students were encouraged to present something creative. Elena asked if I would consider reading a piece from my article. I said I would if she stood beside me. She agreed. We stood on that stage in front of nearly the entire school, classmates, teachers, even the principal. And for the first time, I read my truth aloud. My hands trembled. My voice cracked. But beside me, Elena held my free hand behind the podium, quietly grounding me. When I finished, there was silence. And then one clap, two, dozens. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. After the showcase, the editor of a youth writing initiative approached me with a scholarship offer. Elena beamed with pride, but it wasn't just about the recognition anymore. It was about the journey we'd taken to get here. The stolen friendship, the faked betrayal, the years of silence. None of it had erased what had always been true. She had once believed a lie. Now she stood next to the truth. And we weren't just healing. We were building something new. Together. Years passed. Life moved the way life does. Unpredictably, beautifully, and sometimes with a symmetry you don't notice until you're already living it. After high school, Elena and I stayed together through college. I pursued journalism and storytelling. She majored in social work, driven by a passion to understand people deeper, to advocate for those whose voices had been silenced like mine once was. Our love wasn't a fairy tale. It was real, layered, with moments of doubt, long nights, small victories. But we never let the silence win again. One fall afternoon, I sat across from her at the same library table where everything had restarted. Her hair was tucked behind one ear, her fingers flipping through a proof copy of my upcoming book. It was titled The Message You Never Sent, a collection of essays and stories inspired by high school lies, digital betrayals, and the quiet resilience that follows. At the end, there was a dedication to her, to the girl who was once told a lie about me, and later chose to believe the truth. She cried when she read it, quietly, fully. And then, on a hill beneath the tree we used to sit under in college, I proposed. We were married in a small ceremony. No grand venue, no fancy guest list. Just family, close friends, and the unshakable sense that we'd taken back what was stolen from us. It was peace, and it was power. In her vows, Elena said, "You taught me that truth doesn't scream, it waits." I'll never forget those words. But life, with all its poetry, wasn't done weaving the full circle. Months after the wedding, my book was published. Reviews poured in. People resonated with the pain, the forgiveness, the honesty. And then, a national magazine for young writers invited me to a signing event hosted at a regional education conference, a gathering that, coincidentally, many Former classmates from our high school now attended as teachers, speakers, and staff. When I arrived, there was already a crowd. I spotted familiar faces, the ones who had laughed, who had printed out screenshots, who had posted edited photos of me with cruel captions. They weren't cruel now. Their eyes darted from my name on the banner to the line of people holding my book. Some approached, awkward smiles. Some didn't speak at all, just hovered nearby, pretending to browse other tables. And then, one of them, Kyle, the guy who'd once orchestrated the fake messages, walked up with a copy in hand. "Hey," he said, almost sheepishly. "Could you sign this? For my younger sister. She's been dealing with some rough stuff at school." I looked at him for a moment, not with anger, not even with triumph. Just clarity. I signed it. To those who are hurt but still choose kindness, you're already winning. He thanked me and walked off. No apology. But his eyes held something close to it. Maybe shame, maybe regret, or maybe just the weight of knowing that the boy he tried to break now signed books while he stood in line. Elena joined me a few minutes later. She smiled as she watched the crowd. "Crazy, isn't it?" she said. I nodded. "Yeah, they erased me from their story once, but now I'm the one writing it." We left the event hand in hand. Not because we needed to prove anything, but because we already had. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's a quiet life, lived fully, with the one who chose you after knowing your whole truth. And sometimes, the people who pushed you out of the frame are the same ones forced to stand in line just to get a glimpse.